All right, so we've got a pretty intense stack of articles here all about the death of Brian Thompson,
Oh, yeah.
the CEO of United Healthcare.
Yeah.
And it's a story that's
It's
been,
everywhere.
yeah, it's been everywhere.
Yeah.
Headlines, debates, online.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just take a deep dive and see what we can uncover.
Yeah, I think what's really captured the public's attention is just how seems to connect to like all these anxieties that people have about healthcare in general,
Yeah.
and then also corporate power,
Yeah.
and even how technology plays a role in life and death decisions.
Yeah, and it's not even just the news articles that we have here. There's also court documents, social media threads, like the whole nine yards.
A lot,
Yeah, people are really fired up about this one.
for sure.
So let's just start with the basics.
Good.
Who was Brian Thompson?
So Brian Thompson was the CEO of United Healthcare,
Okay.
which is a really big player in the American healthcare system. I mean, we're talking about 49 million Americans are insured by this company.
Wow.
Like, if you think about it, that's almost 1 in 6 Americans relying on them for healthcare.
Yeah.
So it gives you a sense of just how much influence he had
Right.
and why his death would have such a big impact.
Yeah, it's hard to wrap your head around a company that big and the impact it must have
Yeah.
on people's lives.
Yeah.
You mentioned how this case is highlighting some tensions in healthcare.
For sure.
So what kind of leader was he?
Yeah.
And how did people view him?
Thompson was a complex figure for sure.
Okay.
Opinions on him were definitely mixed.
Okay.
On one hand, he was seen as this successful businessman
Mm-hmm.
who led United Healthcare to become the largest health insurer in the country.
Right.
He was known for being really sharp
Mm-hmm.
and his focus on growth and profitability.
Okay.
But on the other hand,
Yeah.
he was also criticized a lot,
Okay.
particularly from people who felt like the company put profits over patients.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned the criticism.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of the specific concerns about United Healthcare under his leadership?
So a lot of the criticism came from their claims denial practices.
Okay.
There were accusations that they were making it really hard for people to get the care that they needed.
Right.
There was even a class action lawsuit filed against them,
Oh.
alleging that they were actually using AI to automate claim denials,
What?
sometimes even overriding doctors' recommendations.
Oh, wow.
And then there were all the controversies surrounding Medicare Advantage denials.
Okay, can you break that down a little?
Yeah.
What are Medicare Advantage denials and why were they such a big deal?
So Medicare Advantage is basically like a private insurance plan that manages your Medicare benefits.
Okay.
And the issue here is that these plans, including some offered by United Healthcare,
Mm-hmm.
were accused of denying way too many claims
Wow.
just to keep their profits high.
Okay.
The American Hospital Association even criticized United Healthcare publicly for their tactics. And the Senate launched an investigation.
Really?
It's a big deal.
It sounds like there were already a lot of questions
Yeah.
swirling around Thompson and United Healthcare even before his death.
Oh, yeah, and it gets even more complicated
Okay.
because there was also a lawsuit accusing Thompson of insider trading, essentially using confidential information to make money from stock trades.
Wow. So, yeah, not exactly a squeaky clean image.
No, not at all.
So it's clear that there were a lot of strong feelings about Thompson, both positive and negative.
Yeah, definitely.
And then this shooting happens,
Well,
which brings us to the tragic event itself.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what happened?
So early one morning in New York City, Brian Thompson was shot and killed.
Okay.
And what made this case really chilling was that the police found messages actually inscribed on the bullet casings.
What?
Delay, deny, depose,
Oh, wow.
which immediately suggested a link to his work at United Healthcare.
Right. And that's where Luigi Mangione, the suspect, comes in, right?
Exactly.
It seems like he arrived with a purpose. A 3D printed gun, a suppressor, and what authorities are calling a manifesto, criticizing the healthcare system.
Right. Mangione was apprehended shortly after the shooting,
Oh.
and his arrival in New York 10 days prior, traveling by Greyhound bus,
Okay.
paying for a hostel room in cash under a fake ID,
Wow.
points to a level of premeditation.
Right.
This wasn't just random.
Yeah.
He was found with that 3D printed pistol and a suppressor.
Wow. So that suggests planning and technical skill?
Absolutely.
The 3D printed gun is especially interesting.
Yeah,
It's a relatively new phenomenon,
it is.
and it speaks to the increasing accessibility of these weapons and
Yeah.
the challenges they pose for law enforcement.
For sure.
And then there's this manifesto,
Well,
which authorities believe was heavily influenced by the writings of Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah, the Unabomber.
Right.
Now, Kaczynski was this brilliant but troubled figure
Okay.
who carried out a series of bombings over nearly 2 decades, driven by this belief that technology was destroying society.
So it seems like Mangione was particularly drawn to Kaczynski's idea that technology is dehumanizing,
Right.
which connects directly to the criticisms of United Healthcare's use of AI in claim denials.
Yeah.
This case just got a whole lot more complicated.
It really did,
Yeah.
and it raises the question,
Right.
was Mangione just a lone wolf
Right.
driven by personal rage, or was this act like a symptom of a much larger societal problem?
Right.
That's what we need to unpack.
Okay. So we've got this complex figure in Brian Thompson, CEO of a massive health insurance company that's
Yeah.
drawing a lot of scrutiny.
Right.
And then we have the suspect, Luigi Mangione, who seems to be acting out of this deep-seated anger
Yeah.
towards the healthcare system,
Yeah.
possibly fueled by an anti-technology ideology
Right.
inspired by Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Where do we go from here?
Well, first we need to delve deeper into Luigi Mangione himself.
Okay,
Who is he? What led him to this point?
let's do it. This deep dive is just getting started.
So before he arrived in New York, Mangione's life seems to have been pretty ordinary. He grew up in a small town in Ohio, worked some blue-collar jobs, largely stayed under the radar.
It's interesting how someone seemingly average can get involved in something so extreme.
Nah.
Was there anything in his past that hinted at this radicalization?
That's the big question, right? Authorities are still trying to piece together his background. But a few things do stand out. About 5 years ago, Mangione got hurt pretty badly at work, left with chronic pain, limited mobility. He had to fight like crazy with his insurance company, even filed a lawsuit to get the coverage he needed for treatment and rehab.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You know, even dealing with insurance companies for like basic stuff can be a nightmare. So I can't even imagine that frustration amplified by like chronic pain and feeling like your health, your livelihood are on the line.
Exactly.
It's not hard to see how that could fuel some resentment.
Yeah, and it seems like that resentment just festered and morphed into something much darker. There are reports that in the years leading up to the shooting, Mangione became increasingly isolated, withdrawn, spending a lot of time online, immersing himself in those conspiracy theories, anti-establishment forums.
Right. Yeah. The online world can be a breeding ground for that kind of extremism. People find these communities that reinforce their anger, their alienation. It's easy to get sucked down that rabbit hole.
It is.
Was there any indication of what specific online communities Mangione was involved in?
Authorities are still investigating that online activity, but there is evidence that he was active in forums dedicated to, like Ted Kaczynski's writings, the anti-technology movement. He also seemed drawn to content that, kind of glorified violence as a way to achieve political change.
So we have this perfect storm brewing, personal grievances with the healthcare system, exposure to these radical ideologies online, and then this growing sense of isolation and despair. It's just a tragic reminder of how easily someone can slip through the cracks.
It is. And it raises these questions about how we as a society can identify and intervene in these situations before they, what they turn violent.
Right. It's a complex issue, for sure, but one we need to be having. Now, you mentioned earlier that the public's reaction to Thompson's death was really divided.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Wait, can you elaborate on that?
It was almost like a mirror reflecting those divisions in our society. For some, Thompson just represented corporate greed and a system that prioritizes profits over people. His death, while tragic, was seen as, well, some kind of comeuppance.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong reaction. But I guess it speaks to the level of, frustration and anger that a lot of people feel towards the healthcare industry.
For sure. On the other hand, you had those who were horrified by the crime. They saw it as a senseless act of violence. They mourned Thompson as a successful businessman who provided jobs, contributed to the economy. To them, Mangione was nothing more than a cold-blooded murderer. So you have this really polarized response, really reflecting the deep divisions in how people view the healthcare system, the role of corporations in society.
It really does.
You also mentioned earlier that there was a generational divide in how people perceive this case.
Yes.
Could you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, it's actually fascinating. Polls showed younger people, particularly millennials and Gen Z, were more likely to, even if they didn't condone his actions, more likely to express sympathy for Mangione.
Oh, wow. Why do you think that is?
Well, younger generations have grown up, during this time of economic uncertainty, social unrest, growing distrust of institutions. They're more likely to be struggling with like student debt, underemployment, these skyrocketing healthcare costs. And they're also much more tech savvy, right? And acutely aware of the potential downsides of technology, like data privacy concerns, the spread of misinformation.
So they might be more receptive to Mangione's anti-establishment message, even if they don't agree with his methods. It's almost like they see him as a product of a system that's failed them.
Exactly. And this generational divide is really important to understand. It suggests a growing disillusionment with the status quo. Younger generations are more likely to challenge those traditional power structures.
It's a good reminder that this case isn't just about one CEO or one suspect. It's a reflection of these much larger societal shifts, right? This growing unease, frustration with the systems that govern our lives, about the anxieties we have about the future, and how technology plays a role in shaping that future. Speaking of technology, let's go back to that AI aspect of the story. It's one of the most intriguing and arguably unsettling elements of this whole case.
It is. The idea of algorithms making like life or death decisions about our healthcare is both fascinating and terrifying. And it's something that's already happening, at least to some degree, with automated claim denials and other AI-driven processes.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that United Healthcare was facing a class action lawsuit alleging that they used AI to actually deny claims,
Yeah.
sometimes overriding doctors' recommendations. Can you unpack that a bit more? Like, what exactly were they accused of doing? And what are the implications of this kind of technology being used in such a sensitive area?
Sure. The lawsuit basically claimed that United Healthcare was using algorithms to identify claims that were likely to be costly and then flagging them for denial, even if those claims were, medically necessary. There were allegations that these algorithms were biased against certain conditions and demographics, leading to like unfair and potentially harmful outcomes for patients.
So it's not just about the technology itself, but how it's implemented.
Right.
And this potential for bias, unintended consequences. It raises these ethical questions about who's responsible for these decisions, how we ensure fairness and transparency in a system that's increasingly driven by algorithms.
Absolutely. And this case has really brought those questions into the spotlight. It's forcing us to confront that potential dark side of AI in healthcare and to think critically about how we want to use this technology going forward.
It's a conversation we should have had a while ago. Now, I know we've talked a lot about like the societal and technological implications, but let's not forget about the human element. We have a man who's dead, a suspect facing very serious charges, and countless lives impacted by this event. What can you tell us about the current status of the case and what we might expect moving forward?
Well, Luigi Mangione is currently awaiting trial. He's facing charges that include murder, terrorism, and the illegal possession of a firearm. Given how high-profile this case is and the possibility of the death penalty, it's likely to be a long and drawn-out legal process.
It's hard to imagine what's going through his mind right now, facing those charges and, potentially spending the rest of his life in prison.
I'm sure. And the prosecution is likely to focus on, his premeditation, the evidence of his radicalization, and those messages on the bullet casings, all pointing to this deliberate targeted act.
This is going to be a real test of the justice system, trying to navigate these complexities of ideology, mental health, the role of technology in criminal acts.
It will be.
Yeah.
And it's going to be fascinating, albeit in a somber way, to see how it plays out in the courtroom and what kind of precedents it sets for future cases that have similar themes.
This is a story with a lot of threads: individual actions, societal anxieties, the evolving role of technology. And we're seeing those threads converge in this way that's both compelling and deeply unsettling.
It really is. And it's a story that's far from over. The trial, the public debate, this ongoing evolution of AI in healthcare, those are all chapters that are still being written.
Okay, so we've talked about Mangione's background, the public reaction, the legal complexities. But there's one more piece of this puzzle we need to examine: Mangione's manifesto and its connection to Ted Kaczynski's ideology. It seems this connection is key to understanding his motivations and, the broader context of his crime.
You're right. That's where we need to go next to really get a clearer picture of what led to this tragedy.
We know that authorities think Mangione's manifesto was heavily influenced by the writings of Ted Kaczynski.
Right.
And for those who might not remember, Kaczynski, also known as the Unabomber, was a domestic terrorist who carried out a series of bombings motivated by his anti-technology ideology. Can you give us a bit more context on his ideas and how they might have resonated with Mangione?
Yeah, so Ted Kaczynski was a fascinating but deeply troubled figure.
Okay.
He was a mathematical prodigy, graduated from Harvard,
Wow.
earned a PhD from the University of Michigan.
Really?
But eventually he just abandoned academia, retreated to a remote cabin in Montana, living off the grid, rejecting modern society.
It's like a story ripped from the headlines.
It really
is. This brilliant mind rejecting the world.
Yeah.
What exactly did he find so objectionable about modern life?
So Kaczynski believed that technology was inherently destructive.
Okay.
And that it was leading to the erosion of human freedom and autonomy in connection with nature. He argued that this pursuit of technological progress was creating a society that was oppressive, alienating, and ultimately unsustainable.
So he wasn't just a hermit.
Right.
He was actively advocating for a rejection of the systems that underpin our society. And this is where the violence comes in.
Sadly, yes.
Okay.
Kaczynski felt that drastic measures were necessary to disrupt what he saw as a runaway technological system. So he carried out this series of bombings, targeting universities, airlines, individuals he saw as symbols of the technological elite.
Okay.
He ended up killing 3 people and injuring many others.
His actions were horrific.
Absolutely.
But it's clear he was driven by a deeply held conviction, albeit a twisted one.
Yeah.
And this brings us back to Mangione and his manifesto. What evidence is there that Mangione was directly influenced by Kaczynski's ideas?
So investigators actually found copies of Kaczynski's Manifesto, Industrial Society, and Its Future among Mangione's belongings. And there were handwritten notes and online postings that echoed Kaczynski's anti-technology themes and his belief that violence was justified to combat the evils of technological progress.
It's chilling to think that someone would read those words and see them as a call to action.
I know.
Do we know if Mangione ever tried to contact Kaczynski directly?
Well,
or if he saw himself as part of some kind of broader anti-technology movement?
So there's no evidence that Mangione had any direct contact with Kaczynski, who's currently serving a life sentence in federal prison. It's more likely that Mangione saw Kaczynski as a kind of intellectual inspiration. You know, a figure who validated his own anxieties about the direction of society.
And it seems like Mangione took Kaczynski's broad anti-technology views and applied them specifically to the healthcare system. He saw technology, particularly AI, as a dehumanizing force. Prioritizing profits over patients, reducing people to just data points.
It's a key point.
You
know, Mangione had his own personal grievances with the healthcare system stemming from his workplace injury and the battle with his insurance company. Those experiences probably fuel his belief that technology was being used to exploit and control people in the healthcare system.
So he took his personal anger, combined it with Kaczynski's broader ideology to create a justification for his actions.
Exactly. It's a tragic example of how individual circumstances and broader societal anxieties can intersect and lead someone down a very dark path.
It really is, and it highlights the need for greater awareness of the warning signs of radicalization. And the importance of creating spaces where people can express their frustrations and anxieties constructively without resorting to violence.
Absolutely.
This whole case is a stark reminder that we need to be having these open and honest conversations about the role of technology in our lives, its potential benefits and pitfalls, and we need to be mindful of the ways in which technology can be used to empower or exploit people, especially in sensitive areas like healthcare.
Absolutely. It's a conversation that requires nuance, critical thinking, and a willingness to engage with different perspectives. And it's a conversation we can't afford to ignore.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. From the details of Brian Thompson's death to the complexities of Mangione's motivations and the ethical implications of AI in healthcare. It's a story that's both fascinating and deeply unsettling, raising questions that will continue to resonate for years to come.
I agree. It's a story that challenges us to think critically about the world around us,
Yeah.
the systems we create,
Right.
the choices we make individually and as a society.
So on that note, we'll leave you with this final thought.
Perhaps.
If this case sparked a national conversation about healthcare technology and the future we're building, where do you think that conversation should lead?
Yeah.
What changes, if any, do you think are necessary to create a system that works for everyone?
Yeah.
Think about it. Discuss it.
Right.
Let's keep the conversation going.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.